I need to tell you something I've kept buried for 23 years. Something that's eaten away at me every single day since the winter of 2002. My name is John Walker, I'm 55 years old, and I've been a forest ranger in the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana for 32 years. I've seen things out here that would make most people question reality. But nothing, absolutely nothing, compares to what I found that February night and what I chose to do about it. Back then, I was 32, newly divorced, and honestly grateful for the solitude these mountains provided. My ranger station sat 12 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by a dirt road that became impassable 6 months out of the year. I preferred it that way. Out here, the only voices I heard were the wind through the pines and the occasional elk call echoing across the valleys. I'd taken the posting specifically to get away from people, from their judgments, from the wreckage of my failed marriage. The winters up here are unforgiving. Temperatures drop to 30 below zero. Snow buries everything under 8-foot drifts. The isolation becomes absolute. You learn to respect the silence, to read the forest like a book, to understand that nature doesn't care about your plans or your survival. She'll take you if you're careless, and she won't think twice about it. That particular winter was the worst I'd seen in a decade. The snowfall started in November and never really stopped. By February, I was running low on supplies, rationing my food, burning through my firewood faster than I'd anticipated. The radio barely worked. I was essentially cut off from civilization until the spring thaw, and I knew it. But I'd been through bad winters before. I thought I could handle it. I was wrong about so many things. It started with the tracks. I found them on a routine patrol about 3 miles north of my station, near an old mining area that had been abandoned since the 1950s. The tracks were massive, easily 14 inches long, and they moved in a strange loping pattern that I couldn't identify. Not bear. Not moose. Not anything I'd ever seen in my years out here. The stride was too long, the pressure too deep. Whatever made them was heavy and moving with purpose. I followed them for over an hour, my breath freezing in the air, my rifle clutched tight against my chest. The tracks led me higher into the mountains, through dense forest where the snow lay pristine and undisturbed except for this single trail. The sun was setting, painting the snow orange and pink, when I heard it for the first time. A sound I can't adequately describe. Part human scream, part animal roar, but with an underlying quality that was neither. It was the sound of hunger. Pure, desperate, consuming hunger. It echoed off the mountain faces and seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Every instinct I had screamed at me to turn around, to get back to the station, to forget what I'd heard. But I kept going. God help me, I kept going. The tracks led to one of the old mine entrances, a shaft that had been sealed decades ago but had partially collapsed, leaving a gap just wide enough for something large to squeeze through. The sound was coming from inside. That terrible, anguished cry that raised every hair on my body. I stood there in the fading light, snow beginning to fall again, and I made a choice that would define the rest of my life. I went inside. The mine shaft descended at a steep angle, the old support timbers still mostly intact despite the decades of neglect. My flashlight beam cut through absolute darkness, revealing rusted equipment and broken rails. The air inside was different. Colder somehow, despite being sheltered from the wind. It smelled of earth and something else. Something wrong. 50 feet in, the shaft opened into a larger chamber. And there, caught in my flashlight beam, I saw it. The Wendigo. It was massive, nearly 8 feet tall even in its crouched position, emaciated to the point where every rib showed through grayish skin that looked like it had been stretched too tight over bones. Its limbs were too long, ending in hands with fingers like black talons. The head was vaguely human in shape but elongated, with a mouth full of broken yellowed teeth. But it was the eyes that stopped my heart. They were human eyes. Terrified, intelligent, aware human eyes trapped in that monstrous form. And it was dying. I could see that immediately. One of its legs was caught in an old bear trap, a massive one, probably left by miners decades ago. The trap had rusted partially open but still held fast enough to keep the creature pinned. The leg was infected, swollen and oozing. The Wendigo had clearly been there for days, maybe weeks, unable to free itself, slowly starving and freezing in the darkness. When those eyes met mine, I didn't see a monster. I saw suffering. I saw desperation. I saw something that had once been human, transformed by forces I couldn't understand, trapped and helpless and dying alone in the dark. It didn't attack. It didn't threaten. It just looked at me with those terrible, pleading eyes and made a sound that was almost a word. Almost a plea. Help. I should have left. I should have put a bullet in its skull and ended its misery. I should have collapsed the mine entrance and forgotten I'd ever seen it. That's what any sane person would have done. Instead, I went back to my station. I gathered supplies, bolt cutters, chains, medical supplies, food, and I returned to that mine shaft in the middle of a February blizzard to save a monster's life. That was 23 years ago, and I've been keeping it alive ever since. The first few weeks were the hardest. Getting that trap off its leg took 3 hours and every ounce of courage I had. The Wendigo watched me the entire time, those human eyes tracking my every movement. It didn't attack, didn't even try to escape when I finally freed it. It just collapsed onto its side, breathing in ragged gasps that sounded almost like sobs. I'd brought food, raw venison from my freezer, and I slid it across the stone floor toward the creature. It stared at the meat for a long moment, then back at me. The hunger in its eyes was overwhelming, but there was something else there too. Hesitation. Maybe even shame. It grabbed the meat with those terrible clawed hands and ate with a desperation that was painful to watch. That night, I chained it to the wall. I know how that sounds, but you have to understand. I'd seen what Wendigos were supposed to be in the old legends. Man-eaters. Cannibalistic spirits that possessed people during harsh winters, driving them to consume human flesh. I didn't know if this thing would stay docile, didn't know if feeding it would be enough. The chains were heavy industrial ones I'd found in the mine, probably used for hauling equipment decades ago. I secured them around its torso and attached them to an iron ring bolted into the stone. The Wendigo didn't resist. It let me chain it up like it understood the necessity, like it knew what it was and what it might do. I should explain what I'm doing here, how I've justified this to myself over the years. That first night, sitting in my station with my hands still shaking, I tried to make sense of what I'd done. I'd saved something that shouldn't exist. Something dangerous. Something that every rational part of my brain screamed should be destroyed. But I couldn't shake those eyes. That very human awareness trapped in a monstrous form. Whatever this creature was, whoever it had been, they were still in there somewhere. Still conscious. Still suffering. And I couldn't just execute something that looked at me with that much intelligence, that much pain. So I made a decision. I would keep it alive. I would keep it contained. And I would keep it secret. The mine became my second home. Every day, sometimes twice a day, I made the 3-mile trek through the snow to feed the Wendigo and check on its leg. I brought medical supplies. Antibiotics I'd stockpiled for emergencies, bandages, antiseptic. I treated that infected leg like I would any injured animal, though my hands shook every time I got close enough to touch it. The Wendigo let me. That was the strangest part. It would watch me approach with those haunted eyes, would allow me to clean and dress its wounds without resistance. Sometimes it would make sounds, low, keening noises that might have been pain or might have been something else. Communication, maybe. Gratitude. As the weeks passed, I started to notice things. The Wendigo was intelligent. Really intelligent. It would arrange the chains to give itself maximum comfort. It would stack stones in patterns when I wasn't there. I'd find them reorganized each time I returned. Once, I dropped my flashlight, and the creature carefully pushed it back toward me with one extended claw, moving slowly so as not to startle me. It was learning to trust me. And God help me, I was learning to trust it. By late March, the leg had healed enough that the Wendigo could stand again. It was still painfully thin, but the regular food I brought had stopped the worst of the starvation. I'd been bringing it deer meat, rabbits, anything I could hunt in the surrounding forest. It ate everything I gave it with that same desperate hunger, but it never once tried to break its chains or attack me. I started talking to it, just to fill the silence at first, the way you might talk to a dog or a cat. But then I realized it was listening. Really listening. Its head would tilt when I spoke, and those eyes would focus on my face with an intensity that was unnerving. "You understand me, don't you?" I asked one day in early April. The snow was finally starting to melt, and light filtered through the mine entrance, creating shadows that danced across the stone walls. The Wendigo stared at me for a long moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, it nodded. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just an intelligent animal. This was a person. Or had been. Trapped in this form, unable to speak, unable to explain what had happened to them. Just trapped. "What's your name?" I asked, not really expecting an answer. The creature made a sound, a low guttural noise that might have been an attempt at speech. It repeated it several times, and I realized it was trying to say something specific. A name, maybe. But the throat that made that sound wasn't designed for human speech anymore. Whatever name it had once had was lost. "I'll call you Gray," I said finally, looking at its ashen skin. "Is that okay?" Another nod. Slower this time. And something that might have been relief in those terrible eyes. That's when I knew I was in deeper than I'd ever imagined. This wasn't just about saving a creature's life anymore. This was about protecting someone, something that had no voice, no rights, no existence in the world beyond this cave. I'd made myself responsible for Gray, and that responsibility would define everything that came after. Spring arrived, and with it came new problems. Other rangers would be patrolling soon. Hikers would start coming into the area. I had to be more careful, had to make sure no one discovered the mine shaft or what I was keeping inside it. I reinforced the collapsed entrance, made it look even more dangerous and unstable than it was. I posted unofficial warning signs about cave-ins and unstable ground. And I kept feeding Gray. Kept visiting every single day. Kept guarding this impossible secret that grew heavier with each passing week. The years that followed developed a strange kind of rhythm. Every morning before dawn, I'd make the hike to the mine with whatever food I'd prepared the night before. In summer it was easier. I could hunt fresh game, could take my time during the visits. In winter I'd have to break trail through deep snow, my supplies strapped to my back, fighting against wind and cold that wanted to kill me as surely as any predator. Gray grew stronger. Not larger. I think the starvation had permanently stunted its growth, but more alert, more present. We developed a way of communicating that went beyond words. I'd talk, Gray would listen and respond with gestures, with those expressive eyes, with careful arrangements of stones or scratches in the dirt that almost resembled writing. I learned Gray's moods. When the hunger was bad, Gray would pace the length of the chains, agitated and restless. Those were the dangerous times, when I'd stay near the entrance, ready to run if necessary. But Gray never broke. Never attacked. Whatever will or humanity remained in that creature held strong, even when the monster inside screamed for release. I learned that Gray couldn't stand sunlight. Even the indirect light that filtered into the mine's entrance chamber seemed to cause pain. Gray would retreat deeper into the darkness, those eyes squinting and watering. So I brought lanterns instead of flashlights, kept the illumination low and warm. I learned that Gray remembered things. Human things. Once I hummed a song while treating a new wound on Gray's arm, something from the radio, an old country tune from the 70s. Gray's whole body went still, and when I looked up, there were tears running down that gaunt face. Real tears. Gray made a sound that might have been humming, trying to match the melody with a voice that no longer worked properly. "You remember that song," I said quietly. It wasn't a question. Gray nodded, and the grief in those eyes was so profound I had to look away. That's when the full horror of it really hit me. This wasn't just a creature. This was someone who had been human, who had lived and laughed and listened to music, who had been transformed into this thing through no choice of their own. Cursed. Damned. Trapped between worlds with no way back and no way forward. And I was the only person in the world who knew they existed. By the 5th year, I'd developed routines that kept both of us sane. I brought books and would read aloud to Gray for hours. Old adventure novels, nature writing, history. Gray would sit completely still, absorbing every word. I brought a portable cassette player and music tapes. Gray's favorite was classical. Beethoven, Mozart. The complex melodies seemed to soothe something in that tormented mind. But there were close calls. So many close calls. In year 7, a group of hikers got lost and ended up near the mine. I heard their voices from inside, heard them discussing whether to take shelter in the entrance. I'd been with Gray, had to scramble to get out before they ventured too far in. I met them at the entrance, played the concerned ranger, guided them back to the main trail. But my heart was hammering the entire time, imagining what would have happened if they'd seen what was chained in the darkness beyond. In year 11, a documentary crew got permission to film in the area. They wanted footage of the old mining operations, wanted to explore some of the abandoned shafts. I had to pull every string I had, call in every favor, to get them to exclude Gray's mine from their permits. I told them it was structurally unsound, that I'd seen recent collapses, that it was too dangerous. They believed me, but it took months before I could breathe easy again. The hardest part was the lying. I lied to everyone. To my fellow rangers, to my few friends, to the women I dated briefly before they got tired of my secretiveness and distance. I lied about where I spent my time, about why I always seemed distracted, about why I could never commit to anything or anyone. How could I? How could I build a normal life when I was spending every spare moment caring for a Wendigo chained in a cave? The isolation ate at me. There were nights I'd sit in my station, bottle of whiskey in hand, and wonder what the hell I was doing. Wonder if I should just end it. Either walk away and let nature take its course, or take my rifle into that mine and put Gray out of this miserable existence. But I never could. Every time I thought about it, I'd remember those eyes, that fragile trust, that desperate humanity clinging to existence in the most impossible circumstances. Gray was depending on me. And I couldn't let Gray down. By year 15, we'd developed something that almost resembled friendship. I know how insane that sounds. But it's true. I'd spend hours in that cave, talking about my day, my frustrations, my loneliness. Gray would listen with complete attention, would respond in whatever limited ways were possible. Sometimes Gray would gently touch my hand with one careful claw, a gesture of comfort that was heartbreaking in its gentleness. I wasn't just Gray's keeper anymore. Gray was my only real companion, the only living thing that knew all of me, my secrets, my fears, my daily struggles. In that darkness, with that monster, I found a connection I'd never found with another human being. But connections can become chains of their own. And chains eventually always break. Everything started falling apart in year 19. I was 51 years old, and my body was beginning to fail me in ways I couldn't ignore anymore. The decades of hiking through brutal winters, carrying heavy supplies, sleeping in the cold, it had taken its toll. My knees ached constantly. My back spasmed after carrying too much weight. Some mornings I could barely get out of bed. And I was scared. Terrified, actually. Because I'd started doing the math. Started facing the reality I'd been avoiding for years. What happened to Gray when I got too old to make the trek? What happened when I retired? When they assigned a new ranger to this territory? What happened when I died? I had no plan. No exit strategy. I'd spent 19 years maintaining an impossible situation, and I'd never once thought about how it would end. Gray was completely dependent on me. Without regular food, Gray would starve within weeks. Without the medicine I brought for the chronic infections that plagued that damaged leg, Gray would suffer. Without me, Gray would die alone in the dark, just as slowly and painfully as if I'd left that trap closed all those years ago. The realization kept me awake at night, staring at my ceiling, listening to the wind howl through the pines. I'd saved Gray's life, but I'd also made Gray a prisoner. The chains weren't just physical anymore. They were existential. Gray's entire existence depended on my willingness and ability to keep the secret, to keep hiking to that cave, to keep sacrificing everything for a creature that the world would kill on sight if they knew it existed. That winter was brutal. I slipped on ice in December and cracked 3 ribs. For 2 weeks, every breath was agony. But I still made the trip to the mine every single day, gritting my teeth against the pain, because missing even one day meant Gray would go hungry. Gray could see I was hurt, Those intelligent eyes took in my careful movements, my wincing, but there was nothing either of us could do about it. In February, a new regional manager was appointed. Young guy, ambitious, with ideas about increasing public access to the forest and developing tourism opportunities. He started talking about mapping all the old mining sites, making some of them safe for guided tours. Historical education, he called it. Revenue generation. A nightmare for me. I pushed back as hard as I could without raising suspicion. Argued that the mines were too dangerous, that the liability wasn't worth it. But I could see I was fighting a losing battle. The world was changing. The forest was changing. And my ability to keep Gray hidden was eroding with every administrative meeting, every new policy, every hiker with a GPS and a social media account. Then came April and everything changed. I found Gray huddled in the deepest part of the cave, chains pulled taut, making sounds I'd never heard before. Not the usual keening of hunger or the soft noises that meant contentment. These were sounds of pain. Deep, terrible pain. What's wrong? I asked, setting down my supplies and approaching carefully. Gray, what's happening? Gray's breathing was labored, wheezing. When I got close enough, I could smell it. Infection. Bad infection. The kind that meant sepsis, organ failure, death. I examined Gray as best I could with my limited medical knowledge and my shaking hands. The old leg injury had reopened somehow, and the infection had spread through Gray's entire body. The gray skin was mottled, discolored. The eyes that usually tracked me so alertly were glazed and unfocused. Gray was dying. After 19 years, after everything we'd been through, Gray was finally dying. I did everything I could. Brought every antibiotic I had, every fever reducer, every medical supply I could steal or buy without raising questions. I stayed in the cave for 3 days straight, leaving only to get more supplies, sleeping on the cold stone floor next to Gray's trembling form. I talked constantly, begged Gray to hold on, to fight, to stay with me just a little longer. On the third night, Gray's eyes cleared for a moment, found mine in the lamplight. And I saw it there, a kind of peace, an acceptance, maybe even gratitude that the suffering would finally end. No, I said, my voice breaking. Don't you dare give up. Don't you dare leave me here alone. But Gray's hand, that terrible clawed hand, reached out and touched my face with a gentleness that destroyed me. It was a gesture of goodbye, of forgiveness, of release. Gray was giving me permission to let go. I don't remember making the decision consciously, but I found myself unchaining Gray for the first time in 19 years. The heavy links fell away, and Gray was free. Actually free. I helped Gray stand, supported that skeletal weight against my own failing body, and together we stumbled toward the mine entrance. It was dawn. The sun was just beginning to rise over the mountains, painting the snow gold and pink. Gray hadn't seen natural sunlight in nearly 2 decades. I knew it would hurt. But Gray wanted this. I could feel it in the way that body leaned toward the light, in the soft sound that might have been a sigh. We stood at the entrance together, me supporting Gray, both of us looking out at the forest awakening in the morning light. The sun hit Gray's face, and yes, it caused pain. Gray's eyes squeezed shut, tears streaming. But there was something else there too. Relief. Joy, maybe. The simple pleasure of feeling sun after an eternity of darkness. Gray turned to look at me one last time. Those eyes, those terrible, beautiful human eyes, held mine for a long moment. Then Gray pulled away from my support, took 3 stumbling steps into the snow, and collapsed. I sat beside Gray in the snow as the sun climbed higher and the forest came alive with birdsong. I held that clawed hand in mine and watched the breathing grow slower, shallower, until finally it stopped altogether. Gray died in the light, free from chains, with the wind in what remained of hair and the sun-warming skin that had known only cold darkness for so long. I buried Gray there at the mine entrance, in a grave I dug through frozen ground with my bare hands. I marked it with stones arranged in a pattern Gray had favored. A spiral, always a spiral, drawn in the dirt of the cave floor during those long years. I said words I don't remember, prayers to gods I'm not sure I believe in, asking for peace for a soul that had suffered more than any being should. Then I collapsed the mine entrance completely. Brought down the whole thing with explosives I wasn't supposed to have, creating a cave-in that looked natural enough to pass inspection. Gray's tomb. Gray's monument. The end of a secret I'd carried for 19 years. The months after Gray's death were the darkest of my life. I went through the motions at work, filed my reports, led my patrols, smiled and nodded at the appropriate times. But inside I was hollow. Grief isn't a strong enough word for what I felt. It was like losing a limb, like having part of my soul ripped away. Gray had been my constant companion, my purpose, my responsibility. Without that daily trek to the mine, without those watchful eyes waiting for me in the darkness, my life felt utterly meaningless. I started drinking heavily. Not enough to lose my job, but enough to sleep without dreaming. Because when I dreamed, I saw Gray. Saw those chains. Saw that look of peace and pain when the sunlight hit for the first time in decades. Saw myself, day after day, year after year, feeding a creature I kept prisoner in the name of mercy. Had I done the right thing? The question tortured me. I'd saved Gray's life, yes. But what kind of life had it been? Chained in darkness, dependent on the whims of one aging man, denied any freedom or dignity or choice. I'd told myself I was being compassionate, but maybe I'd just been selfish. Maybe keeping Gray alive had been more about my need to feel useful, to feel needed, than about what was actually best for Gray. I'd played God, and I had no idea if I'd been merciful or monstrous. In June, the new regional manager approved a partial survey of the mining district. A geological team would be coming in August to assess structural stability and map the remaining accessible shafts. My heart nearly stopped when I heard the news. They'd see the cave-in. They'd want to know what happened, when it happened, why it wasn't reported. I'd have to lie again, create another story, another layer of deception. I was so tired of lying. But I prepared my story carefully. The cave-in had happened during spring melt, I'd say. Natural subsidence. Nothing unusual. The mine had been unstable for years. I'd reported concerns multiple times. They could check my old reports, see that I'd flagged the area as dangerous. Everything would check out because I'd spent 19 years making sure it would. The survey team came in late August. 3 geologists, young and enthusiastic, excited to be working in such remote territory. I guided them around the district, showed them the accessible mines, answered their questions. When we got to Gray's site, I gave them my prepared speech about the collapse, about the structural concerns, about why this particular shaft wasn't worth the effort of excavation. One of them, a woman named Sarah with kind eyes and a sharp mind, looked at the rubble for a long time. "This collapse is interesting," she said. "The pattern suggests it might have been deliberately triggered. See how the support timbers are fractured here? That's consistent with explosive force, not natural subsidence." My blood ran cold. "Could have been old mining explosives," I said, keeping my voice steady. "They left charges in some of these shafts when they abandoned them. Sometimes they go off decades later due to moisture or temperature changes." She nodded slowly, accepting my explanation but not quite convinced. "Still, we should probably document this more thoroughly. Mind if we do some measurements?" "Be my guest," I said, because refusing would have been more suspicious. I stood there in the August heat, sweating beneath my uniform, watching her take photographs and measurements and notes, praying she wouldn't notice anything that would raise more questions. She didn't. Or if she did, she kept it to herself. The team finished their survey, filed their reports, and moved on to other districts. The cave-in was officially recorded as a natural geological event. Gray's grave was safe. My secret remained buried. But something had shifted in me during those hours of watching Sarah examine the rubble. I'd realized that I wanted to tell someone. Wanted to confess. Wanted to share the weight I'd been carrying alone for so long. The isolation of the secret had become unbearable. I needed someone to know, to understand, to tell me whether I'd done right or wrong. But who could I tell? Who would believe me? Who wouldn't immediately report me to authorities? Wouldn't have me committed or arrested or investigated? The story was insane. A forest ranger keeping a Wendigo chained in a cave for 19 years. No one would believe it. No one should believe it. So I kept my silence, added another layer of lies to the foundation I'd built my life on, and waited for something to break. It broke in September. I was hiking near Gray's burial site, something I did often, unable to stay away, drawn back again and again like a mourner to a grave. And I found tracks. Fresh tracks. Large tracks. Moving in that same loping, inhuman pattern I'd followed 23 years ago. My heart stopped. It wasn't possible. Gray was dead. I'd buried Gray with my own hands. But these tracks were real, pressed into soft earth, leading away from the collapsed mine entrance toward the deeper wilderness. I followed them for 3 miles before they disappeared into a stream. But I'd seen enough. They were identical to Gray's tracks. Same size, same stride, same unnatural gait. Which meant either I was losing my mind, or there was another one out there. Another Wendigo. Alone in these mountains. Starving. Desperate. Dangerous. And I was the only person who knew how to help it. The only person who would even try. Because I'd done it before, and despite everything, despite the isolation, the lies, the moral ambiguity, the suffering, I'd do it again. I knew I would. Because at the core of who I am, beneath all the rationalizations and justifications, is a simple truth. I can't walk away from suffering. Not even when the suffering belongs to a monster. I stood in that forest as the sun set, looking at those tracks, and felt the weight settle back onto my shoulders. The weight I thought I'd buried with Gray. The weight of responsibility, of secrecy, of choosing compassion over common sense. I was 51 years old. My body was failing. My retirement was approaching. And I just found evidence that my impossible burden wasn't over. That it might never be over. That these mountains held more secrets than I'd ever imagined. And I had to decide, right then, standing in the fading light with my knees aching and my back screaming. Did I walk away? Did I report the tracks and let someone else deal with it? Did I finally choose myself over the monsters? I didn't walk away. Of course I didn't. I spent the next 3 weeks tracking those prints, learning the patterns, trying to locate where this new Wendigo might be hiding. I found evidence of deer kills, found marks on trees where something large had scraped its claws, found a depression in the earth beneath an overhanging cliff that might have been a shelter. But I never found the creature itself. It was more cautious than Gray had been, more aware of human presence. Smarter, maybe. Or just more afraid. During those weeks, I had a lot of time to think. About Gray. About what those 19 years had meant. About whether I'd been a savior or a jailer. Whether my actions had been born of compassion or cowardice. I still don't have clear answers. Maybe there aren't any clear answers when you're dealing with the impossible, with situations that exist outside normal moral frameworks. But I've come to some conclusions. Some truths I need to say out loud, even if only into a recording device in my empty station on a cold October night. First, Gray was a person. Whatever curse or disease or supernatural force had transformed them into that creature, the person inside remained. Aware. Suffering. Deserving of dignity and compassion. I don't regret saving Gray's life that first night, and I don't regret the years I spent keeping Gray alive. That part was right. That part was good. Second, the chains were wrong. I knew it even then, but I was too afraid to acknowledge it. I chained Gray because I was scared, because I wanted control, because I couldn't imagine another way to keep the secret and keep Gray safe. But there should have been another way. I should have tried harder to find one. Those chains were my failure, not Gray's punishment. Third, I should have let Gray go sooner. Years sooner. I kept Gray alive past the point where life had any quality, any dignity, any joy. I did it because I needed to be needed, because Gray's dependence gave my life purpose, because I was afraid of the emptiness that would come after. That was selfish. That was cruel. Gray deserved better from me. Fourth, I'm going to do better this time. I'm 55 now. I've got maybe 10 good years left in me, probably less. But I'm using them differently. I've been approved for a transfer to a smaller station even deeper in the wilderness, a place where human traffic is almost non-existent. I've been stockpiling supplies, planning, thinking through every mistake I made with Gray and figuring out how to avoid them this time. I found the new Wendigo last week, a younger one I think, more recently transformed. It's living in a cave system about 8 miles from my new station. Natural caves, not a mine. Better ventilation, better light, better everything. I'm not using chains. I'm leaving offerings instead. Food, medicine, warmth. Building trust slowly. The way you would with any wild creature that's been traumatized. The way I should have done with Gray from the beginning. This Wendigo is skittish, afraid of me, but I see the hunger. The desperation. The human awareness behind those terrible eyes. And I see the possibility of something different. Something better than what I had with Gray. Maybe I'm delusional. Maybe I'm just an old man who can't let go of his guilt, trying to fix past mistakes by repeating them. Maybe this will end exactly the same way, in death and sorrow and questions with no good answers. But I have to try. Because if I don't, who will? Who else would even consider showing mercy to a monster? I'm recording this because I need someone to know. When I'm gone, when this is all over, I need there to be a record. Not to justify what I've done. I'm not sure it can be justified. But to bear witness. To say that these creatures existed, that they suffered, that they deserved compassion even in their monstrosity. That humanity isn't just for humans. This forest holds secrets. It holds transformations and curses and things that shouldn't exist but do. I've been guarding those secrets for 23 years. I'll guard them until the day I die. And maybe, if I'm very lucky and very careful, I'll do a better job this time. Maybe I'll find a way to give this new Wendigo something Gray never had. Not just survival, but actual life. Dignity. Choice. Freedom within whatever constraints nature and circumstance have imposed. Or maybe I'll fail again. Maybe I'll end up right back where I started, chained to my own guilt and mistakes, unable to find a way forward that doesn't involve someone suffering. Maybe compassion for monsters is its own kind of curse, one I'll carry until my last breath. I don't know. I honest to God don't know. But I'm going to find out. The snow is starting again tonight. I can hear it against the windows, that soft hissing that means winter is coming early this year. Tomorrow I'll start the hike to the caves with my supplies. I'll leave another offering. I'll sit in the cold and wait to see if those eyes appear in the darkness. I'll reach out one more time to something that has every reason to fear and hate humanity. And I'll hope that this time I get it right. This is my confession. This is my testimony. This is the truth about the ranger who kept a Wendigo chained in a cave, and what happened when mercy and monstrosity collided in the depths of the Bitterroot Mountains. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect understanding. I just expect to keep walking into the darkness, day after day, year after year, until the darkness finally claims me too. It's what I deserve. It's what I owe. It's what I am. And somewhere in these mountains, in the deep places where the light doesn't reach, something is waiting for me. Something that was once human that remembers what it means to trust, to hope, to be shown kindness in the midst of horror. Something that needs me as much as I need it, in ways that go beyond logic or reason or any kind of sense. We're bound together, these mountains and me and the monsters we hide. Bound by choices made in the darkness, by mercy offered to the undeserving, by the terrible weight of secrets that can never be told. And I wouldn't have it any other way. This is John Walker, Montana Forest Service, Ranger District 7. This is my testimony. This is my truth. And when you find this recording, if you find it, know that I regret nothing. And I would do it all again, every impossible moment, every terrible choice. Because some things are worth more than safety or sanity or social approval. Some things are worth everything. Even if those things have claws and hunger and eyes that hold all the sorrow in the world. Especially then.